Fire Away tackles burning questions and hot topics in Canadian employment law, human resources, and dispute resolution. Hosted by Rudner Law, Fire Away is your go-to source for legal insight on the world of work. So whether you are an employee or an employer, a lawyer or an HR pro, let's ignite the conversation and get into today's episode. Here's your host, employment lawyer, mediator, and founder of Rudner Law, Stuart Rudner.
Welcome to episode 98 of Fire Away. Today we're going to take some time to talk about mental health issues in the workplace, which seem to be more prevalent now than they ever have been. I think in some ways we've come a long way in recognizing mental health and trying to support those in need, but in other ways we have a long way to go. I'm really excited to be joined by two guests today. First of all, we have Mark Biron, who is the CEO of the Psych company, and interestingly transitioned out of the corporate world. And if you look on his website or LinkedIn bio or both, he says he always had the long-term goal of working in healthcare to make a direct and positive difference in the lives of others, while also helping to run and grow a small business. So I love that because I think that will resonate with a lot of our viewers who are trying to run a small business, but also need to deal with some of these issues. So Mark, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me. Really excited to be here.
Thank you. And I'm also joined as well by Chris Robertson, who I have known for many, many years. He's a very well-known employment lawyer who started off in a big firm, now has his own shop focused exclusively on employment law, also has a podcast. So basically, I could be describing myself. We even have pretty much the same haircut. But the one distinguishing factor, as we talked about in the pre-show, is that Chris was a senior officer in the armed forces before going to law school, which is pretty impressive and pretty cool. So Chris, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. Super excited. 98 episodes too. Wow.
That is incredible.
We got to figure out what we're doing for the 100th episode. Every time we talk about this, all I can picture is the Simpsons 100th episode spectacular. So maybe we'll theme it after that. But if you guys have ideas, then feel free, because we'll have to do something cool.
I'll brainstorm a bit and send you over some ideas.
That would be very much appreciated. So, Mark, I wanted to start with you because the other quote that I really liked from your website is it says Krista and Mark founded Psych company as a passion project several years ago. It says before that you were the unofficial managing partner before transitioning out of the corporate world. So, what made this such a passion of yours?
Well, yeah, and you touched on it earlier. It was always a hope of mine to get into healthcare, specifically in mental health care. So I've always wanted to do that ever since I was in university in Montreal, like we talked about a bit earlier. So that's always been near and dear to me. I've always kind of kept a finger on the pulse of that side of things while I was in my day-to-day job. In my day-to-day job, I was doing a lot of information technology, a lot of business advisory, that sort of stuff. So I loved doing that as well. But I always wanted to get to what I was most passionate and interested in. So, when I met Krista, she, of course, started a Psych company, I would say over 12 years ago as a sole proprietor. And I think she maybe had one person on the team. So we joined forces right away. I mean, she's my wife now, but so there's a number of levels on which this is a passion project, I guess.
Right.
I became a sort of part-timer with her as this evolved, and then, as I started to get more acclimated to the value and the different sorts of impacts that this company was making, or that Krista and the other person who was working for her were making, I thought this is not just an interest at this point. It's something that I feel very strongly about. So I made a decision to go full time. And that was tough because I really liked working for the companies that I worked for. Lots of experiences, camaraderie, lots of good memories.
Mm-hmm.
But I made the leap and I haven't looked back since. And why it's even more of a sort of passion project now than before is, and this is kind of, you probably get this too, guys, because you're also running businesses. You get to merge and blend different things into the picture. So I got to pull in some of my business sort of special sort of areas of focus like IT, for example.
Right.
I not automated, but I, kind of modernized our systems and our technology as we were hiring more and more people, and the scale started to expand. Also developed an app. So I was pulling in different things from my background into our company, mixing things up like that, and it just became, just organic. That, when you connect all the dots, yes, we're a mental health company, but we're trying to use all sorts of formats to deliver that and to reach out and to increase our sort of not just our footprint but the value that we're bringing to our clients.
That's very cool, and it must have been also pretty scary because I assume you had a stable job in the
Yeah,
corporate world, and leaving for a passion project would be kind of scary.
yeah.
But it was like, and I don't think I don't know if I saw this, but how long ago was it that you officially joined the Psych company?
2019. No, sorry, 2020. So yes, to your point, it was frightening. It was really scary. And here's the irony. A lot of our clients come in for career, workplace advisory, that type of thing. And a chunk of that are folks who want to get onto a second career or start up, work in a startup or start their very own company.
Hmm.
But there are a lot of factors in the mix, not just the golden handcuffs, so to speak, but confidence. Is this going to work? Can I do this? That type of thing. So yeah, it's been a really, really I would say very, very educational, eye-opening experience for me, all in a good way. There are times though where boy, I miss those benefits. You know?
Like I mentioned, before, I grew up in a big firm, and I miss just the comfort of having an IT department and a
Yeah,
marketing department and an accounting department, as opposed to wearing all those different hats at different times of the same day.
for sure.
And I can just picking up what you said, and then I want to sort of shift over to you, Chris. But you said something interesting because you reminded me of one of my favorite success stories, which was pretty early on in my career. And I was working with a guy who was probably at the time in his 50s, which back then seemed old, and now being in your 50s is not old anymore.
Hey.
Uh, but he'd spent his whole career in the music industry, and he had, by all accounts, a phenomenal reputation, a phenomenal network. He was an employee of a U.S. company. They had decided to essentially eliminate their Canadian operations. They let him go, and he was just devastated. And I often say I feel like I'm sort of part therapist, part lawyer, and this he was just devastated. Didn't know what he would do. The music industry at the time in Canada was really shrinking. And I said, from everything you've told me, you know everyone, you know everything, you've got all the experience. Why don't you start up your own business? And he adamantly refused to even consider it. And about 5 or 6 months later, when I was checking in to see how his efforts to find new work were going, and they weren't, and I renewed that suggestion, and then he started to think about it more seriously. And by that point, to your point, Mark, he had the confidence back, and wasn't as
Awesome.
devastated anymore. Started his business, and he became my first corporate client.
Oh,
And he
great.
That's great.
grew
Wow.
that business. And I think it was sort of him and his wife, and then it was about 3, 5 people, 10, 20, 30 people. And
Yeah.
I love that story, and I love the fact that he has thrived and succeeded. And he probably would have benefited a lot from speaking to someone. I don't know that he did. He only got stuck speaking to me, but eventually he was able to make it work. So
Oh, yeah.
yeah, like that's a situation where I think there's a lot of crossover between what I do and what Chris does, and what you do, where we can help
Exactly.
our respective clients slash patients.
Well, it does sound like you also inspired. You did a lot of the stuff that, so if you don't sell yourself short, you're not just a therapist in that case, you're also a life coach.
Oh,
That's
gonna have to
that's
make
another
get a
area.
bigger business card. But yeah, that's
Yeah.
yeah, we try. And I'll shift over to you, Chris. I'm curious about what I was going to ask you. It's sort of a broad question, but how you see I guess, the impact of mental health issues in the workplace and on what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, so there's a lot going on with mental health and employment law currently. I mean, mental health claims sort of at one point had become almost sort of an obligatory add-on to a wrongful dismissal claim. And that turned largely on tax structuring. Damages are not subject to CPPEI and income taxation, and wages are. And so enterprising lawyers were looking to create tax structures, perhaps, to settle claims. And then we had a significant case which unwound that said, that the claims for damages need to be proven through the tests, and they have to survive real scrutiny, and it was shifted. And for a lot of people, I mean, I think at the time, a lot of employers wrote that that would be sort of the death knell of mental and emotional health claims, or damages for mental distress and anxiety in employment law. And turned out we couldn't have been further from the truth. And in fact, awards are going up. The claims do have to be founded on something more than just a fantasy now. I think, there needs to be some behavior on the part of the employer that can be deemed to be the cause of the harm, and there has to be some demonstrable harm. But we can talk more about how the tests all work. But to my eye, it looks like the damage awards are going up a bit. If the wrongful dismissal awards also seem to be going up in lockstep, which means for employers the costs of bad faith behavior that harms employees on the way out the door is increasing. It's not decreasing. And I think courts are more open. I think courts and judges, especially the more recent appointees, I think they're more open to the harms, and they're more open to the symptomology, which sometimes, is described as being invisible, right? And I think that's so unfair because it's not invisible to the people in the employee's life. It's not invisible to their spouse. It's not invisible to their children. It's not invisible to their parents. It's not invisible to their friends. We've all had somebody who's going through this process, and we've all said, geez, haven't seen you in a while. Why are these people withdrawing from contact at a time when, if they want to find new work, you want them actually to be out there, right? Looking, and you want them to be engaging with their community, not withdrawing from it, right? So there's lots going on, on the legal side.
Right.
And I think it's because there's more awareness around the symptomology. There's still stigma, but there's less stigma, right? And I think that those are all good things.
Yeah, well, I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, I think there's a lot less stigma, although you're right, it's certainly not gone completely. And there's a recognition, and of course, among the judiciary, when you have, I guess, more of the, I'll say, younger members of society, people who are a little bit more in tune with this type of thing, they are recognizing more and more, which I think is great, and it does show some progress. Mark, I mean, I'll kick it back to you. I guess, within the context of the Psych company, where are you seeing, the biggest issues with respect to mental health and workplace?
Well, yeah, building on what Chris just mentioned there, we've seen quite the uptick in short-term disability, long-term disability claims, where folks who've been at a company for a number of years, any number of years, and have been moved around constantly. I guess the proclivity now is to report on the fact that they're not feeling well, whereas I don't think that even as recent as 5-10 years ago, people were reporting that and saying that and putting up their hand and saying, I'm stressed. This is burning me out. Or even like, so yeah, it's a very good question, Stuart. If I look at this as a few different categories, we get burnout, a lot of burnout situations where people come to us, a lot of stress. A lot of people have been catapulted into senior roles when they don't really have the training. So not only are they stressed and anxious, but their confidence just plummeted, which affects every area in their life, their marriage, their relationship with their kids, their friendships, and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I sat down with the team the other day, and we were trying to go through what the most common sort of incidents are for folks who come to us from a uniquely sort of workplace, background, like not career coaching so much as like whether it's being bullied, and sort of like the office politics at work is stressing me out, to whatever. what we were able to quickly see is that, and this is, I think, really kind of, this is a perfect topic that we're discussing right now for what we realized is that aren't most workplaces this really sort of tenuous balance between accountability, you got to deliver on your projects and on your tasks, but also compassion, and vulnerability.
Yeah.
How do those things square, right? Like, and that's a tough thing in this economy too, right? Like, so on top of everything we're talking about, there's the ecosystem, there's everything happening around us.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah.
On that, yeah, that was a great and very eloquent summary of the scenario. I was thinking about our discussion before we connected, and thinking about this scenario, which I see in one form or another quite often. And Chris, I'm sure you do as well. Which is there's an employee who's been with the company for 5, 10, maybe longer years, always perform well. And then all of a sudden their performance is slipping and they're missing things, they're missing meetings, they're missing deadlines. And then maybe there's a suspicion that there might be sort of a mental health issue which might be impacting their performance. And of course, I've seen the organizations who want to bury their heads in the sand, and I don't want to know about it because then we're going to have to accommodate. So, and the really cynical ones that say, well, let's just kind of package them out before he says anything about mental health, which fortunately I'm seeing less of. But I guess the question, and I'll kind of ask each of you because I think there's a more was the word I'm looking for, a more clinical response to this and a more legal response to this. The question is, from an employer point of view, you're the director of HR, you know that this person seems to be struggling with recent performance issues, and you think there might be some mental health issues. And I guess, Chris, maybe I'll go to you first. What would you recommend that the employer do in that case?
Well, so there's a lot to unpack there. So, I think the employer and the employees pay into these disability benefit programs, right? They pay the premiums. Why not make claims, right? Just sort of my first view. Why stigmatize making a claim? I think it's foolish, right? The insurance scheme exists specifically to deal with these facts. So I think using those coverages is great. I think for employers, like you want to be careful. For example, if the workplace follows a traumatic event, whether it's at the workplace or in the personal life, there's a regime, the Workplace Safety Insurance Act. And so current employees, without ever alleging dismissal or anything else, if they can connect the trauma to the workplace,
Right.
they have an act. They have an act. There's a sort of a route for compensation through the WSIA as well, right? So I think that that's something employers should be aware of. But ultimately, I think, you talked about I call it being first to the punch, so both punchers, both fighters throw a punch at the same time and the faster punch wins, right? And that's sort of that race to, did we discriminate? Well, no, we made the decision to terminate before that we were advised of the disability, right?
Right.
I see less of that too now,
Good.
which I think is a good thing. And I think it probably reflects the trend in society around mental and emotional health and its importance. But what I do know from my own practice is if I've seen 10, I've seen 100 medical reports. Almost every therapist and almost every medical practitioner will say that if they can return the person to their routine as quickly as possible, that has a significant impact on how long it takes the person to fully recover and how much they recover, to whether they ever get back to 100%. And so for employers, I guess my first point is if you have the ability to give people time off and you're required to give them time off unpaid under the Employment Standards Act, right? A week off or 2 weeks off might not be the worst thing because your employee may come back to their routine. They may quickly recover. They may quickly rejoin the team and be productive, right? There's a lot to be said for that, right? Instead of treating it as a negative, treat it as a positive, right? You're dealing with the issue is being resolved, and you have a chance to get somebody you've invested time, money, training, who has experience and connections with your customers and suppliers, who knows your operating procedures and how things are done. you get to keep all that, for the price of, some minor inconvenience for a week or two. So
Right.
that's the first thing I would say, about the Employment Standards Act. And then I guess the last thing I would say is the worst thing you want to do is sort of keep the person out of their routine if they're ready to return, whether it's on a graduated basis or on a basis without restrictions. And so
Right.
for people who don't understand the jargon, sometimes people will return on a part-time basis, maybe not full days or maybe not full weeks while they get back up to speed. But again, I know this from my military service, and I know this from my practice. It's the same. The
Yeah.
sooner that you can get somebody who has suffered a traumatic event or who is having a mental or emotional health issue back to their routine, generally the faster they're going to recover. And so I think I think that sort of analysis is lost in a lot of instances for employers because
Right.
they just don't want to have to deal with the administration. And
Yeah.
in fairness, they're concerned that the issue is more severe or will continue to deteriorate.
Mhm.
And, again, those are fair considerations, but, do you really want to be part of the reason why someone's personal health deteriorates, especially somebody who's worked for you for a long time? Nobody really wants to be there, I don't think.
No.
Right? So
Yeah.
unless it's a key contributor, there are options. That's why I exist. That's why HR groups exist. That's why we have professionals that you can consult. There are lots of resources for employers to access. Those are my thoughts. Sorry,
Yeah.
I
No,
feel like I got into it
That's
there.
good.
no, don't,
That was good.
don't apologize. As you said, there's a lot to unpack there. So that was
Yeah.
Yeah.
really helpful. And the last thing you said is, in many ways, probably the most important. There are lots of resources out
Yeah.
Yeah.
there for
Yeah.
employers. And, the
Totally.
three of us are three of them, but there are a lot of
Yeah.
others.
Especially
So,
now. Yeah.
well,
Way more than before.
yeah, no, I was gonna, I figured you'd probably have some stuff to add on this, Mark. So go ahead if you want to
Oh
add to
yeah, sure.
how you would, if you were talking to the employer in that scenario, what you would say.
Well, yeah, and I like a lot. I like what Chris said a lot because I mean, you got to break it into. I think there's the tactical view of like the sort of blocking and tackling day to day, like what would I as the manager of that person do? But then there's also the sort of I guess you could say the helicopter view, looking down, the sort of big picture view of this, where if the intent is, we're investing in our people because healthier people build stronger teams. If that's your sort of intent overall, like then you kind of have to you have to visit like first principles. You hired this person, or this person is on your team. You are trying to be productive. You're trying to create an environment of safety, psychological safety, among other types of safety for your folks, for your team. And that sometimes involves, um, and this is where I think that from what we hear and see, uh, puts off a lot of employers, the sort of nitty-gritty administrative pieces
Hmm.
that come into this. So when someone goes on STD, a short-term disability, they're locking up a vacancy, right?
Yeah.
Like at work, for example. You go on LTD, yes, you are still locking up that vacancy, but the rules around how you as an employer can fill that vacancy changes. There's a lot of different sort of, I guess you could say, nuances that create material impact to you as the employer in different ways. So I see where, being the manager of HR, let's say, there'd be trepidation around, is this person ready to come back to work? But then I
Yeah.
see years ago, I worked at the WSIB and we had return to work. We had all sorts of different programs and plans. And I was in charge of a team that did like analytics and that sort of stuff. We found that earlier nurse interventions, for example, in occupational disease cases, and this trickles over into mental health as well at work, was much more effective,
Hmm.
like 3 or 4 interventions up front than having 20 spread out over a continuum. And that was an amazing insight for us because I'm not just talking about cost savings, but results and outcomes for the employees.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think it's really, and you mentioned it earlier, there are resources now that weren't there like years ago. There's insights that we have now. So as the employer, what I do is probably flush that out a little bit to see what, even if it's not in my handbook or in my resources that are in my, in my office, I'd look out to see, what kind of conversations we could have, right, as an organization.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And I had no idea you worked at WSIB. How long were you there for?
Yeah, about 4 years. Yeah, 4 years, 3 or 4, 3.5, 4 years. Yeah, it was
Interesting.
a very good. I loved being there actually.
Yeah, it must have been a very different perspective.
Oh yeah, yeah, because we had there was a lot of what happened inside, like the inside baseball, but then there was a lot of dealing with the outside too, which had its own interesting sort of moments and learnings for sure.
There you go. That's episode 99. Inside baseball
Yeah,
at the WSIB.
that's right. How not to be bored at work.
Right. Well, that could be a couple of episodes right there.
Yeah.
So I'll flip it around. We've kind of been, or I've been pitching questions about, how would you advise employers, but I'll flip it around to advising the individuals, and a few different scenarios that I'm running, that are running through my mind. But I guess one is, let's just take my scenario before, the individual who has been with an organization for a while and is now experiencing some mental health issues. And a question that I often get, if they consult me, and when they're consulting me, of course, there's usually other issues going on. Maybe it's bullying or harassment, maybe it's perceived bullying or harassment by their
Mhm.
manager. That's one that comes up a lot. Or maybe it's just some sort of fear of constructive dismissal. But either way, the question they often end up asking me is, well, should I tell them that I have mental health issues? And
Mm.
they often start off from the position of fear, that they're assuming it's a bad idea to tell their employer that they have mental health issues, and they figure it'll negatively impact their job and their career. So I guess, well, I'll open it up to both of you guys. Who wants to take that one first?
Well, I'll
Yeah,
dive in.
go for it.
Yeah, fear of dismissal is something that is very hard for a lot of employees, and I think a lot of large employers and a lot of high level management sometimes they fail to appreciate in Canada that a lot of rank and file employees do not have significant savings. Right, they are living paycheck to paycheck, and so loss of employment is terrifying, particularly if they have a mortgage or dependent children. Right, so
Mhm.
that's I'm glad you said that, Stuart, because that's real, right? And it's not just for rank and file employees,
No.
frankly, that the more people earn, the more their lifestyles tend to cost, right? And so
Yeah.
Mhm.
you see sort of a wide range. In terms of reporting, you know, it's interesting, right? Like, so advising employees and employers once somebody has put their hand up and said there's an issue, I think it's it's definitely it's an interesting ground, and you've got to be really careful, right? Because as Stuart was saying earlier, like in addition to the law, in addition to what your facts and the most recent cases will provide for you, there is a function, I think, for lawyers where they are, maybe the first person that someone's talking to about their issue. They're not seeing a therapist yet.
Mm-hmm.
They haven't talked to their doctor about it yet. In fact, it may be on the call that they're having with their counsel that these issues are being identified, right? And so for me, I actually have a roster. I have a number of people that I will refer people
Hang
to,
out.
and I hope they go on to have those consults and get information.
Yeah.
So there's that
Yeah.
issue too. And then the last thing is, for the employers, again, it's always this, you don't want to get dragged down into a significant fight, right? You don't want to get dragged into a discrimination in employment case, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the issue in discrimination in employment, just for people who are following along at home, is that the timing of a discipline or management or a termination from employment against the reporting of a disability is how many claims establish a nexus or a connection between the disability and the adverse treatment. And
Yeah.
so it's funny. you as an employer, you want to rush to do something to help someone who's in distress. On the same token, if you rush in or if you act precipitously, you can inadvertently create that nexus for a plaintiff claim that you just don't want. And so it is
Mhm.
nuanced. And my advice to employers is if somebody puts their hand up, one, give them all of the supports they're entitled to under your plans immediately, right? If you have an EAP, get them information. If you have short-term disability, get them information. If you have group health benefits that cover therapy, get them information immediately. But the second thing
Yeah.
you really should be doing is getting some seasoned advice, particularly if it's a long service employee, or particularly if the disability that has been identified is serious and there's going to be a prolonged period of treatment, right? So, the what constitutes a disability for the purposes of the Human Rights Code, it's a pretty wide spectrum, actually.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But there are some things that are just the treatment program is obviously going to be longer. And there are others where perhaps, as I was saying earlier, if we can get people back to their normal, they have a stronger chance of making full recovery, faster recovery, and if they're not going to fully recover, a better recovery, right? So,
Yeah.
Right. Right.
so that those are my thoughts on that. Sure, thanks.
Oh, oh. Art, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, sure. I think that usually I think when we come across these types of situations, it is very nuanced as they can be very nuanced, as Chris mentioned. I think there are a number of reasons why. I think first of all, how a boss, a manager, director, middle management, top management, either way, how the incentive model works, like how you're paid, right? And how you're
Sure.
looked at by your bosses. Like you're delivering, your team loves you, you're having you're having your employment, your annual employment, your annual review,
Great.
and your CSATs and your employee satisfaction scores, like those things determine who you are at work in a lot of ways, right? So when someone on your team has something potentially coming your way and you're not sure how to put your arms around it, there are a number of things you can do, right? And I think that a consultation is the number one thing. If you don't know, I mean, because there could be a bunch of causes underlying why someone is presenting in a certain way. If someone's about to put their hand up and say, I don't feel so good, I'm going to need to take some time off. Like that's a landmine to a lot of bosses that they just don't want to necessarily step in. So there's that.
Hmm.
And then there's, am I going to still be able to deliver this project or am I still going to be able to deliver to my commitments?
Hmm.
If one of my managers takes off for a year and I have to rehire and replace them and fill them, a lot of different impacts. I would say that the advice that because we do like something I should have said up front is I'm not a clinician. I'm sorry I didn't say that up front.
Yeah.
I run the business.
Yeah.
So as not being a clinician, I'm not a fly on the wall in any of these sessions that our team has.
Right.
But we do unpack things in a very anonymized way,
Yeah.
or where there's no personal information, where we talk about cases at a high level. And we do see a lot of this where a manager will come in and say, I'm getting stressed because, half my team wants to eject, press
Mm.
the eject button. We saw this a lot during COVID, especially because for various different reasons. Like I'm going to another employer because I can work from home more with them and so
Yeah.
forth. But whatever the case may be, we have had many people come through our door saying, not sure what to do in this case. I'm scared that, I've already had someone leave or who's on long-term disability. And, I can't take the amount of pressure on me on the things that I'm obliged to deliver at work. If anyone else from my team were to put up their hand and say I can't be here anymore. And so I think there's a real stigma. A lot of it does get to the incentivization, like in the way that works. And
Hmm.
there's cause too. Like, I mean, a lot of like flip side now, not looking at the boss, looking at the employee.
Right.
A lot of employees come in and say, I'm having problems with my boss. And, I want to take time off because he's stressing me out. And then at the end of the day, it's someone who doesn't get along with anybody. So it's kind of
Right.
like one of these odd mixtures where, yes, that's a valid point, and those lead to stresses and all sorts of things that we need to pay close attention to. But in some cases, too, it's the environment.
Yeah.
Like maybe going on a secondment somewhere else, you don't even feel that, like you don't skip a beat. So there's a bunch of different things that you could do as the employer, I think.
Yeah, it's funny. You hit on one of the topics I was going to bring up, and I know we've already gone pretty long, but it's been a great discussion. So I'll throw this out because it's something that comes up a lot. Chris, I'm sure you've seen it, and Mark, I suspect that those in your clinic have as well. Which is exactly what you just said. You've got an employee, and they're suffering from stress and anxiety at work, but it is caused by their manager. So what I've seen it a lot where they're off on a leave because their doctor or medical practitioner has said they need some time off from work. But eventually there's a request for accommodation, but the accommodation is simple: get them away from that manager,
Hmm.
put them to a different department, different shift, different whatever, which is often easier said than done. So I guess I was curious again, I guess from the legal side and also from the clinical side to get both of your thoughts on how those scenarios tend to play out.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I mean, I see that. In the return to office, you raised earlier a lot of people who don't want to commute back downtown, I think, in one of your comments. I'm seeing a lot of claims for leave or claims of disability. I can't commute,
Yeah.
right? And so what I would say to employees is be careful, right? Like if HR gets
Hmm.
10 disability requests and everybody suddenly has an illness which doesn't prevent them from working a full day at home, but prevents them from, taking the TTC or driving a car, right? Watch out because like statistically, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? And so employers do have rights, right? They don't have a right to ask for a note in Ontario, at least not initially, but there are all kinds of third party independent medical assessors or examiners. I guess they're called IMEs. Is that right, Stuart?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
IMEs, right? Who will, the employer doesn't see the medical information, but the IME does. And they're going to look at the doctor's notes. And, if they come to a different conclusion,
Mhm.
the STD period will end, and there'll be a graduated return to work, right? And if it's a difficult manager, if it is in fact a difficult manager, again, what I would say to employees is document. And what I would say to management is if you're getting complaints, listen, right? But at some point, uh, if it's just a personality conflict, unfortunately, employers in Ontario do enjoy the right to terminate, and they enjoy the right to terminate for arbitrary reasons, absent statutory protections. And so, to your point earlier about whether you should report your whether you should report your mental emotional health issues or not, if you haven't, and the employer is faced with something which appears to be just a pure personality
Mm.
conflict, it's open to the employer to pick one or the other, right? And so, if there is an underlying issue, probably better to report in those circumstances.
Yeah.
And have I seen a lot of movement, from one manager to another? No,
Oh,
that's not something that employers are going to reward because some managers are going to be perceived as being more difficult than others. Some
yeah.
managers are going to be perceived as being more lenient than others, right? And what you'll
Yeah.
end up with is a slew of complaints trying to manipulate, who's in what group. And so I can understand why employers would be very reluctant to entertain that. Although in
Hmm.
certain circumstances, where there's perhaps, underlying trauma and there's something just specific to the manager that is triggering that trauma, that's, personal to the manager, but not necessarily something they're doing themselves, right? If there's something really if there's something really particular, if you can make out that kind of argument, I think an employer might consider that. But that's going to be very, very rare. That's going to be, you're going to see those circumstances, maybe it's almost never, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually reassuring to hear you say that, Chris, because I do see a lot of these, and I agree. Like in many cases, it's people just trying to manipulate the system, either
Yes.
to get away from the manager they perceive as
Yeah.
being the harsher one, or to avoid
Yeah.
having to return to the office, which is a whole other issue. So I agree. But if there is a legitimate reason, then it's like any other form of accommodation. It can be appropriate, but it's
Mm-hmm.
going to be unusual. Mark, do you want to take the last word?
Uh, sure. I know this is a gross oversimplification in some ways, but the way we look at it is people are patterns in a lot of ways, right? So if you look at the manager, if you look at it from has that manager, uh, has this been reported a lot? Is something that keeps happening with that manager? Is this something that this employee keeps reporting? Like it's like we're a collision of different patterns, right? So I think
That's a
that
good phrase. I really like that. That's really
thank
good.
you.
I'm going to use that.
Thank you. I didn't
Yeah.
even like, it just came to me. I do because we see both sides of the fence when folks come in to see us, and it is situational in a lot of cases, but and also in a lot of cases it's not so situational. On the one hand, someone's trying to game the system, and they've been doing this repeatedly from workplace to workplace to workplace. But within each workplace, they don't see that. A lot of folks stay maybe 10 years much shorter this like for staying at an employer these days. So their employer doesn't necessarily see that pattern, right? We do because we usually have people who are with us for years. They come back and forth, things get better, and they come back when things aren't so good. So we do see those patterns. We also see when a manager comes in and yes, they've been complained about a lot. And so they work on themselves, they try. I think it really gets down to there is compromise that has to be made, but you also have to, as the employer, be vigilant because if it can be, if the system can be manipulated in some way, or so that the employee has some sort of advantage coming out of it, then you don't want to be you know holding a chair when the music stops as a manager, because for a number of reasons. One, for your own job, but for the rest of your team who depends on you, and for your clients who rely on your services. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think you have to come in being empathetic and having compassion, but at the same time working within the framework of your HR department, and your policies and your compliance are there for a reason. And I definitely think that, we've seen this so many times, someone who just does not get along with anybody.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I feel for that, for the person who, they don't have that problem, but they've had a run of bad luck. And, they've maybe had a couple managers who they've not gotten along with, and it's hard on them. What do they do? And to your point earlier, Chris, you mentioned I have not seen many transfers from department to department. Our therapists have not seen that happen too much.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's
So
pretty unusual, but yeah, you by the way, you had a couple of great quotes in there that I think Chris and I both took note of, but also just kind of emphasize the point that I always make, and I'm sure Chris, you make it all the time as well, which is very, very rarely black or white in our world of employment law. There are a lot of shades of gray. And this just comes down to balancing a lot of issues. So I know we've gone way longer than usual, but that reflects the value of the conversation. So I really appreciate both of you guys taking the time to do this. And before I wrap up, I just want to give each of you guys a chance to let people know how to find you. So Mark, if people want to learn more about you and Psych Company, what's the best way to do that?
www.psychcompany.com. So that's PSYCH company.com. And yeah, we don't have a very strong social media presence at the moment. We did for some years, but we've changed a bit of our strategy. So that is the main way to get to us. Or just visit my LinkedIn profile, Mark M-A-R-K, Biron, B-R-I-O-N, and a lot of information on our company is on my profile as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for coming on the show today.
Thanks for the opportunity, and it's great to meet you guys. It's great to see you again, Stuart. It's great to meet you, Chris.
It was fun, yeah.
You as well.
And
And Chris,
just
what's the best way to find out about you and your firm?
the best way to reach me is www.robertson like a hyphen law.ca. And we have a podcast as well, Water Cooler Justice. So if you want to take a listen, to sort of hear what employment lawyers are saying about technical aspects of employment law, we tend to focus on very specific cases. Come join us there and take a listen.
I gotta say, I've been on your podcast. I listened to it, and
One of my favorite guests, Stuart.
oh, I think you said that to all your
Awesome.
guests, but thank you. But I gotta say, when you say employment lawyers talking about cases, that might not sound like the most exciting podcast, but I gotta say, every single one, you get great guests, myself perhaps excluded. You get great guests, and there's great conversations and a lot of joking around, and it's a lot of fun. So yeah, I encourage people to check that out.
I love inside baseball, right? So I want to hear episode 99. I want inside baseball at the WSIB. I would gladly be a fly on the wall for that call.
All right, well, we will see what we can arrange. In the meantime, that's a wrap for episode 98. So I want to thank Mark and Chris for being guests for a fantastic discussion. Also want to thank our production team for helping put the show together. Of course, I want to thank all of you guys for listening or watching. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, like our podcast and our YouTube channel to get our updates. Check out all of our social media to keep up to date on employment law matters generally. And to quote one of my favorite hockey broadcasters, the pleasure was all ours.
At Rudner Law, we want people to treat their employment relationships as legal relationships and make informed decisions rather than assumptions. Keep up to date on Canadian employment law issues by following us on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and TikTok, liking our Facebook page, subscribing to our YouTube channel, and signing up for our newsletter. Past episodes can be found on YouTube, on our website, and archived on Facebook. And if you like our page or subscribe to our channel, you will receive notifications when the episodes are live. As we always say, none of that replaces legal advice tailored to your specific circumstances. If you think you might need an employment lawyer, you probably do. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us.